Hey guys, welcome back to Fiction Flux. Hope you're all doing well. Now let's get into it. The last thing Izuku Midoriya saw before the light took him was All Might's smile. Not the hero smile, not the symbol of peace smile that had been on posters and billboards and the walls of his childhood bedroom since he was old enough to understand what heroes were. The real one. The one that Toshinori Yagi had given him in the last seconds of everything, standing in the rubble of what used to be the final battle, with the villain network destroyed, and the casualties counted and the cost written in the specific language of things that could not be undone. He had smiled at Izuku. He had said, "You did it." And then the light had come from somewhere Izuku could not identify, and the world had gone white, and the white had become everything, and everything had become cold. The specific biting cold of a season that had not been winter when the light took him. He was on a rooftop. He knew this rooftop. He had been on this rooftop. The specific geometry of it, the angle of the building across the street, the rusted water tower 3 blocks east. He knew all of this the way you knew things that had been important at formative moments. He was 16. He had been here at 16, on this rooftop, standing at the edge, looking at the city and trying to figure out how to be enough. He looked at his hands. One for all was gone. He could feel the absence of it the way you felt the absence of a sound that had been present for so long it had become part of your baseline. The specific warmth, the crackling potential, the weight of 8 previous holders that had never fully felt like weight because it had felt like company. Gone. He pressed his palms together. Nothing. He was quirkless. He was 16. He was on the rooftop where he had stood at 23 and looked at the city and made the decisions that had built everything that followed. He was standing on it again. And somewhere in this city, somewhere in this version of the world where none of it had happened yet, was a man named Toshinori Yagi who had not yet met him, who was the symbol of peace, who was the #1 hero, who was going to offer him one for all in approximately 4 months. He sat down on the rooftop. He put his face in his hands. He thought about the white light and the smile and the "you did it." He thought about everything that had come between 16 and 23. He thought about the cost. The cost was not abstract, it was specific. It had names and faces and the particular weight of things that could not be undone. Good people who had been hurt, people who had died, people who had survived but carried what surviving cost for the rest of their lives. He had been trying to be the hero who prevented those costs. He had prevented some. Not all. Not enough. He sat on the rooftop for a long time. He did not write in a notebook. He had no notebooks with him. He had the clothes he had been wearing at the end and his hands, and the specific knowledge of someone who had lived through one version of the next 7 years, and was now at the beginning of them again. He had information. He knew what was coming. He knew where the threats emerged. He knew the timelines. He knew the names. He knew the specific chain of decisions and failures and missed opportunities that had produced the final battle and its cost. He sat with all of this. And then he had a thought that was not comfortable. The thought was, what if the hero approach was the wrong approach? He had been a hero, completely, the most heroic thing he knew how to be. He had trained and broken himself and trained again, and held the line through every crisis, and tried to protect everyone he could reach. And the cost had still been what it was. He sat with the thought. He turned it over. He thought, what if the thing the hero system cannot do, the thing it is structurally incapable of, is what actually needs doing? He thought heroes react. Heroes respond to threats that have already materialized. Heroes address the symptom. He thought the villain network that produced everything that followed was not built overnight. It was built over years in the specific spaces that the hero system did not look at, the margins, the places where the system's attention was not pointed. He thought a villain could go to those spaces. He thought a villain could dismantle what was being built there before it was built. He thought a villain could make the final battle unnecessary by preventing the conditions that produced it. He looked at the city. He thought, this is either the most important idea I have ever had or the most dangerous one. He thought, I am not sure those are different things. He wrote it in his mind the way he would have written it in a notebook. He wrote, the hero system protects the world from villains, but who protects the world from the conditions that produce villains, who goes into the dark places, who dismantles the networks before they become the thing that requires dismantling. He wrote, not a hero cannot go there. A hero is visible. A hero is constrained by the system they represent. A hero cannot operate in the margins without the margins knowing they're compromised. He wrote, but a villain can. He looked at his hands. He thought about everything he knew. He thought about the 7 years ahead. He thought, I am going to need a different approach. He thought, I am going to need to become something the system does not know how to read. He stood up. He looked at the city for the last time as the version of himself that existed before the decision. He said out loud quietly to the city, and to All Might somewhere in it, and to the version of himself that had grown up wanting to be the hero everyone could see, he said, I'm sorry. He said, I'm going to do something harder than being a hero. He said, I'm going to be what heroes can't be, so heroes don't have to pay what they paid. The city did not answer. He walked off the rooftop. He had work to do. The first thing he needed was information. Not the information he already had, the future knowledge, the specific timeline data that he had been organizing in his head since the rooftop. That was what he was working from. What he needed was current information, the present tense version of the landscape he was navigating. He knew what was operating in this city. He had studied it from the hero side, the commission reports, the intel briefings, the specific networks that he had fought against for 7 years. He knew the structure. He had never known it from the inside. He was going to learn it from the inside. Not by joining it. He was very clear with himself about this on the second day, sitting in a library that still had the same smell it had when he was 14 and came here after school because the apartment felt too quiet. He was not going to become a villain in the sense of choosing what villains chose. He was going to occupy the shape of a villain, the function of one, the specific role that allowed access to the places heroes could not go. He wrote it out in the library. Not in a notebook. He had bought paper and pen from a convenience store, the specific physical process of writing helping him think the way it always had. He wrote, the goal is not to be a villain. The goal is to prevent the future I know is coming. The method is to operate outside the hero system in ways the hero system cannot. The cover is the villain role. The actual work is the dismantling of the networks before they become threats. He wrote the ethical lines of these. I will not hurt innocent people. I will not allow innocent people to be hurt when I can prevent it. I will not build anything, I will only dismantle. I am not creating a villain empire. I am destroying the conditions for one. He wrote, the cost of this approach is that I will not be seen as a hero. I will be seen as a villain. I will be feared. I will be opposed by people who are trying to do the right thing and will not have the information to understand what I am actually doing. He wrote, I accept these costs. He wrote, the alternative is 7 years of the hero approach, followed by the cost I have already paid. I am not willing to pay that cost again. He looked at what he had written. He wrote, I am not doing this for recognition. I am not doing this to be remembered correctly. I am doing this because I have information nobody else has, and the information creates a responsibility, and the responsible use of that information requires this. He wrote, that's the justification. I will return to this justification whenever what I'm doing becomes unclear. If I cannot justify it in writing, I will stop doing it. He looked at his hands one more time. He folded the paper. He put it in his pocket. He went to work. The first network he found was small. Operating in the industrial district of Musutafu, in the specific margins between the hero patrol routes, in the gaps that the current hero system had not yet identified as gaps. He had known about it from the commission briefings of his original timeline, a supply network for villain organizations, moving equipment and information in quantities too small to trigger standard detection. Small now. Enormous in 4 years. He spent 3 weeks mapping it. Not by infiltrating dramatically, by being in the spaces it operated through, by watching how it moved, by understanding the specific human geography of it, the people in it, what they needed, what they were afraid of, what they wanted that the system was not providing. He had spent 7 years learning to see people completely. He applied that seeing here. He saw most of the people in the network were not ideologically committed to villainy. They were in the margins because the margins were where they had ended up, and the network offered something, money, protection, community, the specific dignity of being useful to something even if the something was wrong. He wrote about this. He wrote, this is what the hero system does not see because the hero system looks at the network as a criminal structure rather than a collection of people with specific needs the legitimate world was not meeting. He wrote, dismantling the structure without addressing the needs that the structure met would produce either the same structure rebuilt or something worse. He wrote, "I need to address both." He spent 2 more weeks doing something that looked, from outside, completely inexplicable for someone building a villain reputation. He found resources. Quiet ones, the specific unofficial infrastructure that existed in every city, the organizations that operated in the margins of the legitimate world, the people who provided what the system did not, the networks of actual human care that ran parallel to official structures. He connected people from the villain network to those resources. One at a time. Not by announcing what he was doing, by making it happen, a word in the right place, an introduction arranged, an opportunity made visible to someone who had not known it existed. He was very patient. He was very quiet. People started leaving the network. Not dramatically, not in ways that announced anything. They just stopped being in it, found other places to be, other things to do with the specific need the network had been meeting. The network shrank. In the timeline he had lived through, this network had been one of the supply lines for a major villain organization 2 years from now. The supply line had required significant hero resources to address after it became visible. He was addressing it now, before it became visible, before it required heroes. He was also, in the process, developing a reputation. Not the one he had planned for. He had expected to be operating in invisibility for longer than this. But the villain world was small in the ways that any specialized community was small, and things that happened in it moved through it, and what was moving through it was a question. Who was the quirkless kid, dismantling the Musutafu supply network? He had not accounted for being quirkless being notable. He had been quirkless for so long in the original timeline, before One for All that quirkless had stopped feeling significant. But in the villain world, in the world of people who operated through force and quirk power, and the specific leverage that ability provided, a quirkless person operating effectively in the margins was something that did not compute. He wrote about it. He wrote, "The quirkless factor is creating more visibility than I planned for, adjusting approach." He wrote, "The visibility might actually be useful. The villain world is looking for something it cannot classify, something quirkless operating intelligently in their space. That unclassifiable quality could be more effective cover than straightforward intimidation." He wrote, exploring this direction. The second network was in Hosu. Larger, more organized. The specific infrastructure of something that had been building for years under careful management. He had known about this one from the hero briefings too, known what it became, known the specific damage it produced, known the timeline of it. He arrived in Hosu in February. He was 4 months into what he had been doing, and he had 15 sheets of convenience store paper covered in documentation, and a reputation in 3 districts that he was still not entirely comfortable with. He had also, in those 4 months, prevented approximately 40% of the damage that the Musutafu network would have caused in the original timeline. He knew the 40% was approximate because he was working from future knowledge applied to present conditions, and the precision of the application was limited by the variables he could not control. He wrote 40% prevented, 60% still on the trajectory. The Musutafu work is not complete, beginning Hosu work in parallel. He wrote, "The parallel operation is going to require more capacity than I currently have." He wrote, "I need help." He had been avoiding this conclusion. He had been avoiding it because help meant trust, and trust in this context meant trusting people with information that could destroy everything he was doing. Not the future knowledge. He was not telling anyone about the future knowledge, but the actual nature of what he was doing, the specific distinction between the villain shape and the actual work, that was information that required trust. He wrote, "The person I need would have to be someone who understood the distinction between what I appear to be and what I am, who could operate in the same space, who had their own reasons for doing this that were not contingent on my explanation of mine." He wrote, "I don't know if that person exists." He found them 3 weeks later. She was not who he expected. She was 21 and she had a misdirection quirk, and she had been operating in the Hosu margins for 2 years before he arrived. And she had been doing something similar to what he was doing in her own way without the future knowledge, driven by the specific motivation of someone who had grown up in the margins and knew what the margins needed and had decided to provide some of it. She found him actually, not the other way around. She walked up to him in a specific place that told him she had been watching him for at least a week and said, "You're not what you look like." He said, "What do I look like?" She said, "You look like someone building something. But what you're actually doing is tearing things down. And you're tearing down the specific things that need tearing down, which means you have information about what needs tearing down that most people don't have." She said, I want to know where the information comes from. He looked at her. He said, I can't tell you where it comes from. I can tell you what I'm doing with it. She said, then tell me that. He told her. Not everything. The future knowledge stayed private. Telling her would either make her trust him immediately in ways that were themselves untrustworthy, or make her think he was unstable in ways that would end the conversation. He told her the operational truth, what he was doing, why, the ethical framework, the justification he returned to when things became unclear. She listened to all of it. She said, the hero system can't do what you're describing. He said, correct. She said, because it's constrained by visibility and accountability, and the requirement to operate within the legal framework. He said, correct. She said, and you're not constrained by those things because you've chosen the villain shape. He said, yes. She said, but you're not actually a villain. He said, I'm trying not to be. She said, what's the line? He said, the line is the ethical framework. I will not hurt innocent people. I will not build power structures. I will only dismantle. And every decision has to be justifiable in writing before I make it. She said, you write things down. He said, constantly. She said, me too. She said, okay. He said, okay, what? She said, okay, I'll work with you, on the condition that the ethical framework is actually non-negotiable, that you stop the moment it is violated, that you're honest with me about what you're doing even when the specifics of your information source stay private. He said, yes, to all of that. She said, and if you violate the framework? He said, then you stop me. She looked at him. She said, you mean that? He said, if I become what I'm trying to prevent, then I need to be stopped. Yes. She held out her hand. He shook it. She said, what do I call you? He thought about it. He had been operating without a name. In the villain world, the nameless thing was its own kind of presence, the unidentified entity that the community was trying to classify. He had been letting the classification happen organically. He needed a name now. He thought about the original timeline, the name he had been given, the name that had started as a slur and become something else. He said, Deku. She looked at him. She said, that's a useless name. He said, I know, that's the point. She said, explain. He said, Deku means useless, quirkless, the thing that can't do anything, and I'm quirkless and I'm doing this. The name is the misdirection, the thing that's supposed to be useless doing the work that everyone with power keeps failing to do. She looked at him for a long time. She said, that's either very smart or very dramatic. He said, probably both. She said, fine, Deku it is. She said, I'm Kurai. He said, that's also not your real name. She said, no, but it's the name that works for this. They went to work. The next 2 years were the years of building what they were tearing down. Not a villain organization, something that had no name because naming it would have given it a shape that the wrong people could find and use, a network of understanding, the specific quiet infrastructure of people who knew what they were looking at in the margins and had decided to address it before it became what it was going to become. Kurai brought people she trusted. He brought the future knowledge applied as strategic direction. Together, they developed something that did not exist in the hero world's vocabulary. The villain world called them the Phantom Network. Not because they were frightening, because they could not be found when anyone looked directly at them. They were in the margins of the margins, operating in the specific negative spaces of the structures they were dismantling. The hero world became aware of them differently. The hero world noticed that specific threats that should have materialized were not materializing. Networks that should have grown were shrinking. Supply lines that should have solidified were going quiet. The specific chain of development that the Commission's threat analysts were tracking was moving in directions that did not match the models. Someone was in the margins. Someone was addressing things before they required addressing. Nobody knew who. Nobody knew it was a 16-year-old who was now 18 with convenience store paper documentation and a partner named Kurai and the specific weight of future knowledge he could not share with anyone. He kept writing. The documentation had evolved from convenience store paper to actual notebooks. He had 40 notebooks now. The documentation framework was as complete as he could make it without the ability to verify against external sources. He wrote 18 months of operational work. The Musutafu network is fully dismantled. The Hosu network is at 30% of its original size and declining. The 3 networks we identified in the southern districts are in early dismantling stages. He wrote, the original timeline had each of these networks reaching full operational capacity between now and year 5. The current trajectories suggest they will not reach that capacity. He wrote, the cost of preventing that capacity is this. I am 22 months into operating as something the hero world calls a villain. I have not been hurt by heroes yet. The hero world does not have accurate enough information about me to engage directly. But All Might has been briefed on the Phantom Network, and the briefing classified it as an unidentified threat operating in the villain space. He wrote, All Might thinks I am a villain. He wrote, this is the cost I said I accepted. He wrote, I am accepting it. He wrote, I want the record to show that accepting it is harder than I anticipated. He looked at that. He added, and I am doing it anyway. The moment that changed everything happened in month 26. He had been tracking a specific development, a recruitment pipeline that was feeding into one of the remaining networks, pulling people from the same kind of margin that the Musutafu supply network had operated in. He had been planning to address it the same way he had addressed everything else. Patient, quiet, addressing the need underneath the structure. He arrived at the location. The location was a building in a district that had been declining for years. Economically, structurally, the specific kind of decline that produced margins and margins produced networks and networks produced the things he was trying to prevent. He arrived and found All Might. Not fighting, not patrolling, standing in the street outside the building with the specific quality of someone who had arrived at the same location from a different direction for different reasons. All Might was looking at the building. He was not in his hero form. He was Toshinori Yagi in a coat that was too large for him in the specific way that All Might's clothes were always too large for Toshinori Yagi. Izuku stood at the end of the street. All Might had not seen him. He was 18 years old, standing at the end of a street, looking at the man who had given him everything in the original timeline. The man who had been his mentor and his symbol, and the person whose smile he had last seen in the moment before the white light. He thought about the rooftop. He thought about the choice. He thought about 40 notebooks and 26 months, and the networks that were smaller than they should have been, and the cost he had said he accepted. All Might turned. He saw Izuku. And Izuku saw All Might see him, saw the assessment happen in real time, saw All Might reach for the classification he had been given in the briefings, the Phantom Network, unidentified threat, villain space operator. All Might said, you're the one they've been calling Deku. Izuku said, yes. All Might said, the commission briefed me on the Phantom Network. Izuku said, I know. All Might said, they classified it as a threat. Izuku said, I know that too. All Might looked at him. He said, you're quirkless. He said it not as an accusation, as a data point that did not fit the model. Izuku said, yes. He said, and you've been operating in the villain space for over 2 years. Izuku said, yes. He said, but you're here. He looked at the building. He said, you're here for the same reason I'm here. It was not a question. Izuku looked at the building. He said, yes. All Might was quiet. He said, the networks that have gone quiet, the Musutafu supply line, the Hosu organization, the Southern District cells. Izuku said, yes. He said, that was you. Izuku said, yes. All Might sat down on the curb. He did this with the specific weight of a large man sitting down, because standing up was no longer the appropriate posture for the conversation. He said, tell me. Izuku looked at him. He said, all of it. All Might said, all of it. He sat down beside him. He told him. Not the future knowledge, not yet. He told him the operational truth, the framework, the ethical lines, the specific choice he had made on the rooftop and why, the 26 months of work and what it had produced and what it had cost. All Might listened to all of it. When he finished, All Might was quiet for a long time. He said, you chose the villain shape because you believed it was the only way to address what you were seeing. Izuku said, yes. He said, you have an ethical framework. Izuku said, 40 notebooks. He said, of course you do. He said, the framework has held. Izuku said, yes, every decision is documented, every justification, if you want to review it. He said, I believe you. Izuku looked at him. All Might said, I've been doing this long enough to know what someone looks like when they're doing the wrong thing for the wrong reason. And I've been doing it long enough to know what someone looks like when they're doing a hard thing for the right reason. He said, you look like the second one. Izuku felt something in his chest. He said, I wanted to be a hero. All Might looked at him. He said, in the original version of things, I wanted to be a hero. All Might said, what original version? Izuku looked at the building. He said, I need to tell you something else. All Might said, okay. He told him about the white light. He told him about the rooftop, and what he had known when he arrived there, and the decision he had made with that knowledge. He told him everything he had been carrying alone for 26 months. All Might was very still through all of it. When he finished, All Might said, you came from the future. Izuku said, yes. He said, and in the future you were. Izuku said, I was the #1 hero, for a while, and then the final battle happened, and the cost was what it was. He said, and I decided to prevent the cost rather than pay it. He said, the hero approach was not enough the first time, I needed a different approach. All Might was quiet for a very long time. He said, and you chose this. Izuku said, yes. He said, alone. Izuku said, Kurai for the last 8 months. He said, before that alone. Izuku said, yes. All Might looked at him. He said, you were 16 when you arrived. Izuku said, yes. He said, and you took all of this on at 16. Izuku said, I had information nobody else had. The information created the responsibility. All Might said, that's not how responsibility works for 16-year-olds. Izuku said, I know, I wrote about that, in Notebook 3, I was aware the weight was not proportionate to the age. He said, I did it anyway because the alternative was knowing what was coming, and not trying to prevent it. All Might looked at him for a long time. He said, in the future, the smile. Izuku looked at him. He said, you saw me smile and then the light came. Izuku said, yes. He said, what was I smiling at? Izuku said, you said I did it. He said, and then the light came. Izuku said, yes. All Might was very still. He said, you came back because you didn't want that to be where it ended. Izuku said, I came back because the cost was too high, and I had information that could change it. He said, both things were true simultaneously. Long silence. All Might said, what do you need? Izuku looked at him. He said, what? All Might said, you've been doing this for 26 months with convenience store paper and 1 partner, and no institutional support. You have 40 notebooks and a framework that has held, and a track record that the Commission's own analysts have noted even though they cannot explain it. He said, what do you need to finish this? Izuku said, I can't come back into the hero system. The work I'm doing requires the villain shape. The hero system cannot go where I'm going. All Might said, I know. He said, but the hero system can know what you're doing and work around it, instead of against it. I can make sure the Commission's threat response does not interfere with the Phantom Network's operations. He said, I can be the bridge between what you're doing and the system that doesn't understand it. Izuku said, if the Commission finds out what I am. All Might said, I'll handle the Commission. He said it with the specific weight of someone who had been handling the Commission for 30 years and had opinions about their handling that he kept mostly private. Izuku looked at him. He said, you believe me? All Might said, yes. He said, why? All Might said, because you're quirkless and you've been in the villain space for 26 months, and you've been dismantling threat networks instead of building them, and you have 40 notebooks with an ethical framework. He said, and because the specific way you talk about the future tells me things about it that are consistent with the directions I already see things moving. He said, and because you look like someone who got handed something he didn't ask for, and has been carrying it as correctly as he knows how. He said, I recognize that look. Izuku felt the thing in his chest again. He said, in the original timeline you gave me one for all. All Might said, and in this one. Izuku said, I don't need it, I have something else. All Might said, 40 notebooks. Izuku said, and 26 months of knowing what the margins look like from the inside. All Might looked at the building. He said, so, shall we address this one together? Izuku looked at the building. He said, yes. He said, I have a plan. All Might said, I assumed you did. He said, it involves misdirection and the specific use of your public visibility as cover for my approach from the other direction. He said, I'll need you to be very visible on the east side. All Might said, I can do visible. Izuku said, I know. He stood up. He looked at the man who had given him everything in one life, and who was now sitting on a curb in a coat too large for him, ready to be a bridge between systems for a version of him that had chosen a different path. He said, thank you. All Might said, we're not done yet. Izuku said, I know. He said, I meant thank you for before, the original version. All Might was quiet. He said, you smiled. All Might looked at him. He said, in the original version, when you said you did it, you smiled the real one. All Might said, yes, I imagine I did. Izuku said, I'm going to earn that again. He said, the right way this time. He said, so nobody has to pay what they paid. He walked toward the building. All Might stood up. He went to the east side. They went to work. 3 years later. The threat networks that had produced the final battle in the original timeline had not materialized. Not because they had been defeated heroically, not because of a dramatic confrontation, because someone had been in the margins for 5 years, quietly, patiently, addressing the conditions that produced them before they became what they were going to become. The Commission's analysts filed a report that year noting unprecedented stability in the threat landscape. Networks that their models predicted would grow had not grown. Supply lines that should have solidified had gone quiet. The specific chain of development that had been building toward the original timeline's conclusion had not built. The report did not know why. All Might knew why. He had been the bridge for 3 years, not loudly, not visibly, in the specific quiet way of someone who had decided that this was the work that mattered and had organized his institutional position around enabling it rather than explaining it. The Commission had not been fully informed. They had been informed enough. Kurai knew the operational truth. She had been working in it for 3 years and had brought 12 more people into the work, and each of them knew what was required of them and had the framework and had been meeting it. Nobody else knew. The world did not know. The world knew Deku as a name in villain space briefings, an unclassified entity, quirkless, operating in the margins with unusual effectiveness, classified as a low-level threat based on absence of direct civilian harm, flagged for monitoring, never located for engagement. The world did not know that Deku was a 21-year-old, with 63 notebooks who had come from a future. He was rewriting one margin at a time. He was on a rooftop. Different rooftop from the first one. He had accumulated rooftops the way he accumulated notebooks, each one the specific location for a specific quality of thinking. This one was for the accounting. He did the accounting once a year. He wrote Year 5 of operational work. Networks dismantled or significantly reduced. 11. People redirected from network involvement through alternative resource connection, approximately 340. Threat events prevented based on original timeline projection, 46% reduction in confirmed cases, estimated 60 to 70% in unconfirmed cases where the prevention was upstream enough to make measurement difficult. He wrote Cost, 5 years of the villain shape, 5 years of being classified as a threat by the system I am trying to protect, 5 years of All Might as the only institutional bridge. He wrote, the cost is what I said I accepted. He wrote, I accept it. He wrote, the alternative is the original timeline's cost. I have not forgotten what that cost was. I write it in every notebook because forgetting it would make the acceptance less honest. He looked at what he wrote. He added, the world is different from the trajectory it was on 5 years ago. Not completely different, not perfectly different, but measurably, documentably different in the specific ways that the networks I have been dismantling would have produced. He added, that's the data, that's the conclusion. He closed the notebook. He looked at the city. The city was doing what cities did, enormous and complicated, and full of people navigating their specific lives with the specific information available to them. Full of heroes keeping the peace, full of people in the margins doing what margins produced, full of the ongoing complicated reality of a world that was not the original timeline's world. He looked at it. He thought about the rooftop at 16 with no notebooks, and the decision and the I'm sorry he had said to the city before he walked off. He thought about 63 notebooks and curai, and 12 people with the framework, and All Might on a curb, in a coat too large for him saying, "What do you need?" He thought about 46%. He thought about the white light and the smile. He thought, "I did not earn the smile yet." He thought, "But I am closer than I was." He thought, "I am going to keep going." He opened notebook 64. He wrote at the top, Year 6. He wrote under it, Ongoing. He wrote under that, "I will not hurt innocent people. I will not build power structures. I will only dismantle. Every decision is justifiable in writing." He wrote, "That's the whole framework." He wrote, "That's the whole thing." He looked at the city. He looked at the work ahead. He began. And that is the story of Izuku Midoriya, who went back and chose the hardest path available. Not the heroic one. Not the one that looked right from outside. The one that required him to be invisible and misunderstood and classified as the thing he was trying to prevent. The one that required 63 notebooks and 5 years in the dark. The one that required accepting the cost of being seen wrong so that the people who came after him would not have to pay what he had already paid. No cap, this is the most built different version of Deku we have ever written. And 63 notebooks proved it. Every single page. If you made it to the very end of this one, you are absolutely Fiction Flux family, and we love you for it. Please subscribe and hit that like button and share this video with every anime fan you know, because every single share helps us grow and reach more people who love these stories as much as we do. It genuinely means everything to us. Drop in the comments what topic you want us to cover next, because we make these for you, and we want to know what worlds you want to explore together. See you in the next one.